When some people think of cabin life or lake life, the first thing that pops into their head is being out on a boat, wakeboarding, or jet skiing. But cabin life's not just about a day at the beach, it's about having a place to go to escape your everyday life, no matter what the time of year. And for the people in today's story, what was supposed to be a week long, fun trip out to the cabin quickly took an earth shattering and life changing turn that completely left them shaken. But before we get into that encounter, if you've had an encounter or know a story you'd like to have shared here on the show, please email me at the link below. And if you like today's story, gently slap that like button. And if you haven't done so already, especially if you're a return viewer, hit that subscribe button. While you're at it, swing by the notification bell's place after work, have it hop in the passenger seat, blast it out to the cabin so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Shawn grew up on the outskirts of Toronto, Ontario, which is the largest city in Canada, but he was by far the furthest thing from a city kid. His parents, they owned a fair-sized cabin located about 3.5 hours north of Toronto, and from the time he was about 4 years old, every single weekend, no matter what the time of year, his family, they were going out to this cabin. And when they were out there, Shawn would spend all of his time doing all types of motorsports. He was a bit of a motorhead from the time he was about 4 or 5 years old. And anything with a motor, Shawn was addicted to it from a very early age. Shawn would also spend a lot of time fishing out on this lake. This lake was very secluded. There was only about 4 or 5 other cabins all around this lake. So when they would go out to their cabin, they were basically cut off from society. The nearest neighbor was probably about a 20-minute walk through the bush, and they would very rarely even ever see any of them. They might run into them on the lake, but when they would be out on the road, they would basically be on their own. And Shawn, again, from a very young age, he would wander around the bush out at this cabin. He would wander off far from the cabin by himself. He'd walk down the roads, and it was not uncommon for him just to hop on his bike, go down the gravel road, and for his parents not to see him for several hours. As Shawn got older, his love for the outdoors just continued to grow. And when he was about 15 years old, it was not uncommon when his family would go out to the lake for Shawn just to disappear all day, all night, off into the woods by himself. He would go camping several miles from his cabin completely solo. So to say that Shawn was not an experienced outdoorsman would be further from the truth. This kid grew up in the bush, even though he grew up in the city. He was completely at home out in this area. He knew every inch of the area surrounding the lake where his parents' cabin was, like most people know the back of their hands. Once Shawn had his driver's license and he was a senior in high school, there were several times where his family were not going out to the cabin, but his parents were completely cool with Shawn and a buddy driving that 3.5 hours out to the lake because his parents knew that he knew how to get the cabin up and running for a weekend. He knew how to get the pump started, and they had no concerns at all with his abilities out at the cabin. Once Shawn graduated high school, though, he was not able to get out as much as he liked. He started going to college in Toronto, and that really took up a lot of his time. He found on the weekends he was stuck either working or studying. And if he wasn't working or studying, more times than not, he would be at a college party. He would be out hanging out with friends, and he just did not get out to the lake as much as he would like. He would still go out a couple of times a year, but it was nowhere near the amount of time he would spend out there that he spent growing up. But early into his last year of college, Shawn met a girl named Annie, and the two of them, they very quickly hit it off. They enjoyed a lot of the same things, but when it came to the outdoors, these two, they were polar opposites. Shawn grew up out in the bush. He grew up going to the cabin. And Annie, she was a city girl. She basically never left Toronto. And her experience with the great outdoors was pretty much just a park in Toronto or going to the zoo. She basically never went out of the city limits of Toronto, even as a kid. So these two, Even though they had a lot of similarities, they were very different. But one thing that the two of them did share in common was their willingness to try different things with each other. So, come February of that year, right as they were about to have their spring break, they were talking about what they could do for spring break. And Shawn came up with this awesome idea that he could take Annie out to his parents' cabin. They could go out there for the entire week. They could go snowmobiling. They could do some ice fishing. He could show her around nature. And Annie actually very quickly jumped at this chance. She was really looking forward to going out to this cabin. And she ended up telling her friend Claire that her and Shawn were going to go out to Shawn's parents' cabin. And her friend Claire, who was also a city girl, she got really excited for Annie and she started to get a little bit jealous. And she asked Annie if Shawn would be okay if her and her boyfriend Michael came out that week as well. When Annie asked Shawn, Shawn was a little bit upset. He was really looking forward to just being the two of them. And he did not know Claire's boyfriend, Michael. He knew Claire, but he had never met her boyfriend. But at the same time, he was thinking, you know what? How bad could this be? There's four of us going out. That means less work for me to do. I could share some of the work with this Michael guy. This will probably still be a pretty good trip. I'm going to get my girlfriend out to the cabin. I'm going to go snowmobiling. I haven't done that in ages. I'm going to get to do some ice fishing. You know what? This is going to be fine. As the time came for them to head out to their cabin, the four of them, they started making their plans. They made a list of all the gear that they were going to bring out, a list of all their food. Then, once spring break started, that final day of college, right before spring break, they loaded up Shawn's truck with everything they would need, and they made that 3.5 hour drive out to the parents' cabin. Fairly early into the drive, it became very apparent to Shawn that him and Michael were complete opposites and they were going to clash. Michael kept asking Shawn questions over and over and over, and the type of questions he kept asking him really were starting to annoy Shawn. Shawn was getting very annoyed with this constant questioning, and by the time they got to the cabin a few hours later, Shawn was already just basically willing to say, you know what, I'm just going to turn this truck around and head back home. Like, he was already that close to just giving up on this week out at the lake. But once they got to that driveway, Shawn became even more annoyed. It was full on dark at this point, and Shawn was not able to get his truck up the long 200-meter drive up to the cabin because of the vast amount of snow. It was not just the snow that was the problem. It was the fact that where the cabin was up on the top of this hill that overlooked down towards the lake. And that driveway was incredibly snow covered. He did not have the proper tires to drive his truck up. He did not have the power in his truck. So that meant they were going to have to park on the road, carry everything 200 meters up this hill to the cabin. So Shawn pulled the truck over to the side. And then because they had so much stuff with them, they were not going to be able to carry everything in just one trip. So they made a plan that the first trip, all four of them would carry as much as they could. They'd head up to the cabin. Shawn would get the power going. He would get the electric heaters going. He would get a fire going in the wood stove. And then him and Michael would head back down to the truck and bring more stuff up. And they would continue to do that until everything was up in the cabin. And that's exactly what they did. But on the last trip down to the truck to get the last of the stuff, they were about halfway down, so about 100 meters from the cabin, another 100 meters down to the truck. All of a sudden, the nighttime air was just filled with the sounds of wolves howling. Almost immediately, once these wolves started howling, Michael, he just completely froze in fear. He just stood there, holding his flashlight up, looking side to side into the bush. And Shawn can see that Michael was terrified. He could tell just by the look on his face. So he tried to reassure him that this was normal, everything was okay. But Michael actually refused to move. He just would not take a step forward. He would not walk back up to the cabin by himself. And Shawn at this point was actually very annoyed with Michael. He was like, "Hey, dude, it's fine. It's just wolves. They'll leave us alone. I come across them all the time out here. Don't worry, we're fine. Let's just get the last of the stuff, get back up to the cabin to the girls." But Michael just would not budge. So Shawn had to walk Michael all the way back up to the cabin. He left him at the cabin. Then he made that 200-yard walk down to his truck, grabbed the last of the stuff, and now he was like completely bundled up. He was carrying way too much stuff. It was enough stuff for two people to carry, but he really did not have any other choice. He really did not want to make one of the girls walk this walk and walk back uphill carrying stuff. So he just basically sucked it up and he just hauled through it. He ended up getting everything up to the cabin. Once he was in the cabin, he basically had a conversation with Michael telling him, dude, look, everything's okay. Like, you need to calm down. You're safe out here. I've been out here since I was a kid. You're okay. And even though Michael was shaken by those wolves, he did listen to Shawn, and very slowly over the next couple of hours, he started to loosen up a bit. He started going outside onto the deck to have a cigarette by himself, and he was starting to feel more at ease. Later that night, it was now the early morning hours. All four of them, they were going to be heading off to bed. And Shawn, he had to go restock the wood stove one last time for the night. Once he got to where the wood stove was, he went to reach down to grab some wood. And he discovered that they had already burned all their wood. They would have to go outside to get more. Michael, at this point, actually volunteered to go outside to get wood, and it kind of shocked Shawn a little bit. He kind of looked at Michael and was like, really? You're okay to do that? And Michael's like, yeah, you know what? I'm feeling a lot better now. The woodshed's not far away. I got this, bud. I'll go get the wood. At this point, Shawn's like, you know what? Maybe this guy's not that bad. Maybe I just needed to get to know him a little bit better. And he watched Michael make his way out the side door. He watched him step down the stairs. And Shawn was actually starting to feel a little hopeful for the next day when they were going to be going snowmobiling. However, that hopefulness was abruptly shattered when all of a sudden he could hear from outside towards the woodshed Michael screaming at the top of his lungs. And this was not just a normal scream, like, this was a blood curdling, scared to death, terrified type scream. Shawn just immediately sprung into action. He ran to the door. He ran outside. He did not even put his boots on. He was running through snow knee deep. He gets over to where Michael was, and Michael's just completely pale as a ghost. Shawn ended up reaching out. He put his hand on Michael's shoulder and he asked him what was wrong. And Michael just blurted out. He said, I just saw a werewolf. Shawn kind of looked at Michael like, what the hell are you talking about? You just saw a werewolf? And he's like, what? And Michael holds his flashlight up. He's shining it into the bush. And he's like, I just saw a werewolf. There's a werewolf in the bushes. It was looking at me. I just saw a werewolf. Shawn started to laugh. He kind of looked at Michael laughing. He's like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? You saw a werewolf? He's like, man, werewolves don't exist. He's like, you probably saw a coyote. You probably saw one of the wolves. And Michael's like, no, I saw a werewolf. This was a werewolf. This was not a dog. This was not a coyote. This was not a wolf. This was a werewolf. And Shawn again's like, dude, these do not exist. What are you going on about? He's like, I told you, you probably just saw a wolf. And Shawn, as much as he tried to convince Michael, Michael just kept on repeating that he saw a werewolf. So Shawn's thinking, great, not only is this guy useless, but he's also crazy, and he did not know what to do. So he just took a step past Michael. He reached down, he grabbed some wood out of the woodshed, holding it in his hands. He looks at Michael and says, come on, guy, get in the cabin before your werewolf gets you. And as the two of them turned to head back up to the cabin, all of a sudden they heard this real deep guttural howl. It was incredibly loud. It was super deep, coming from the direction that Michael had claimed to see this werewolf. Shawn immediately stopped walking. Michael picked up on the fact that Shawn was no longer beside him. He stopped as well, turned, looks at Shawn, and says, what the hell was that? And Shawn was completely baffled. He knew what wolves sounded like. He knew what coyotes sounded like. And this sounded a lot different. It just had a massive lung capacity to it. And he looked at Michael and said, I don't know. That's not normal. Let's get inside now. The two of them, they actually ended up running back up to the cabin. They went inside. And both girls were actually standing by the door because they had heard Michael screaming before. and they were asking what was going on and what was wrong. Michael told both the girls that he had seen this werewolf, and they too had heard the same howl that the guys had heard. And Shawn's basically stuck in the middle, trying to piece together what had just happened, what this howl was, what Michael could have seen. And everybody was looking to him for answers, and he did not have any answers for them. The best he could come up with was that it was just a wolf, and that what Michael had seen was probably a wolf standing up against a tree. But Michael kept on denying that. He kept saying that no, he saw a werewolf, that this was not a normal wolf. But Shawn was not buying into it. Even the girls thought Michael was kind of losing it a little bit. And Michael was just standing there, just pleading with them, saying, "We have to go. Let's just go. Let's just leave everything. Let's go to the truck. I don't want to be here. Can we please go?" And all the others were like, "We can't go right now. It's super late at night. We're all super tired. It's a long drive back. Like, just go to bed. We'll deal with this in the morning." So the four of them, they did end up going to bed. But as Shawn was laying there in bed, he just kept thinking about that howl over and over. Just how weird it sounded, how it sounded a lot like a wolf, but a lot different, and just had that real strong lung capacity to it. And over the next little bit, Shawn felt the temperature in the cabin starting to drop. The electric heaters were just not keeping up with the cold outside. And he knew he was going to have to go outside and get more firewood, because when they ran up to the cabin, he actually dropped all the wood on the ground. And he was debating if he really should. Even though, he grew up out at this cabin, he knew the entire area like the back of his hand. That howl, it was just not sitting well with him. But he ended up telling himself, you know what? You're just being a wuss. You're just shooken up. You spent countless nights out of the bush out here by yourself before. There's nothing out there to be afraid of. Just go get the firewood. So he slowly sat up. He made his way to the back door. He put his boots on. Then he took a couple of steps down the 5 steps that led down to the ground. And when he was on about the 3rd step, all of a sudden he just felt this undeniable feeling of dread. It almost stopped him right in his tracks. He had this feeling like if he took one more step, something bad was going to happen, and that he should just not go any further forward. He should just head back inside. And just getting that feeling really shook him, because he had never experienced anything like that before. So as soon as that feeling struck, he just immediately kind of froze, started looking around. He reached into his pocket. He did not have a flashlight, but there was a little bit of light from a light on the side of the cabin. And so he was looking towards the bush line, scanning it, looking for anything that might be causing this feeling. Maybe there's the wolves that were howling earlier. Maybe they're close up to the cabin now. Maybe that's why he's feeling it. But as he's looking towards the tree line, all of a sudden, out of the corner of his eye, up to his right, he sees this little bit of steam kind of come down. And out of the corner of his eye, what it looked like was this steam when you exhale when you're out in the cold. And he felt this like sinking feeling just go through his entire body, because he knew that the only thing up to his right was the overhang of the roof of the cabin, and it was nowhere near where the wood stove was. So, reluctantly and just completely dreading what he might see, he slowly turns his head up to this right, and he just almost immediately felt like he was going to have a heart attack, because he could see up on the roof this dark silhouette kind of crest up against the moonlight. He could not make any details out, but he could see that there is clearly something on the roof. So he's standing there looking up at this thing, when all of a sudden this thing turns, looks down directly at him, and that's when he got a good look at this thing. This thing was absolutely massive. It was about 7.5, 8 feet tall. It had the head of a wolf that looked a lot like a German Shepherd. It had the pointy ears. It had the long snout. It was completely covered in hair. And what he noticed was that it looked like it actually had long arms. He could see what looked like one long arm kind of grabbing onto the side of the eaves trough of the cabin, kind of holding itself, stopping it from sliding off the roof. And when this thing was looking at him, he could see that its eyes glowed this like glowing ambery color without the light really even reflecting on it. It was like these eyes just emitted that color. As he's standing there staring up at this thing, everything that had happened before was shooting through his mind like at a mile a minute. And he remembered what Michael said about seeing a werewolf. And Shawn, seeing this dogman creature, this werewolf, looking down at him, replaying that thought in his head about Michael, he was completely terrified. He could not move. And then it opened up its mouth, exposing its long, razor sharp teeth. And Shawn was just staring up at it, just in utter disbelief, when all of a sudden this thing let out this low, deep, guttural snarl type growl. It pulled its lips even further back. And at that point, it kind of snapped Shawn out of this trance. He started slowly backing up towards the door, not taking his eyes off this creature on the roof. And as soon as his back hit up against the door, he swung around, he grabbed the doorknob, pushed it open, and he actually ended up falling into the cabin. He quickly scurried up, grabbed the door, slammed it shut, locked it, ran back through these two big glass sliding doors. He closed those, he latched them locked, grabbed the blinds, slid them over the window. And then he took a couple of steps back, and at this point, he was almost hyperventilating. He was having a real hard time catching his breath when all of a sudden he heard Annie's voice behind him asking him what was wrong. He turned to look at her, and Annie instantly saw that Shawn was completely terrified. He was as white as a ghost, just like Michael was when they went outside, and she knew something was wrong. Shawn looked at Annie and said, Michael wasn't lying. There's an effing werewolf on the roof. Get everybody in the living room. We're going to have to go. We cannot stay here. I don't know if this thing's coming in. Get everybody now. We have to go. Annie immediately starts screaming, which abruptly wakes up the other two. They come into the living room, and as soon as Michael saw Shawn's face, he knew that Shawn had seen the same thing he did. Shawn looked at Michael and said, You were right. And at that point, Michael, it looked like the blood drained from him too, because it was like this moment of realization that he was not crazy. He did see something outside. And he knew that if Shawn looked like this, if Shawn was this shaken up and this was his cabin, that they were in some danger. The four of them, they tried to make a plan on what they were going to do. They knew they had to leave, but their truck was a good 200 yards back down towards the road. And they knew if they tried to run, whatever this thing was up on the roof would get them. The four of them, they decided they would just wait it out overnight. They ended up basically huddling up in the middle of the living room of the cabin. Each one of them grabbed some type of a weapon, whether it be a knife or a fireplace poker, and they sat there all night. And all through the night, they could periodically hear this thing outside breathing underneath the door. They could hear it growling, they could hear it snarling. Occasionally, it would let out one of those real deep howls. And every single time this would happen, all four of them thought that this creature was just going to break down the door, come in and get them. However, that never did end up happening. Slowly, the sun started to come up, and as the sun started to come up, they noticed that they had not heard this thing outside anymore. So as soon as the sun was all the way up, the four of them, they just left everything in the cabin. They got all dressed, and then all four sprinted that 200 meters back down to the truck. Once they got to the truck, they abruptly made their way home. And over the next few weeks, they kind of refused to talk about it to anybody, even Shawn's parents, when they asked why they came back so early. They just made up different reasons. They just said, oh, it was way too cold, or we just weren't feeling it, or somebody was sick. And they did not open up about this experience to anybody, including Shawn's parents, for several months. They did a lot of research online to try to figure out what this was they saw, and what they came up with, what best matched the description of what they saw and what they experienced that night, was a dogman. Shawn actually stopped going out to the cabin pretty much altogether, and to this day, he does not like going out into the woods. And if he does, it has to be in the middle of the day. It has to be in a well-populated place with a lot of people. Well, that's it for today's encounter. Let me know your thoughts on this one. I don't know about you, but if I was out at the cabin, went outside, and I had a dog man on the roof of my cabin, I don't think I'd really want to go back there either. But let me know your thoughts. And as always, thanks for joining us. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.